Welcome to today's episode of Manitowoc Garage. Today we're going to be discussing part 2 of operating the carrier suspension on GMK4100L-1. In part 2 we will discuss operating the suspension from the HMI control boxes also used to operate the outriggers. In order to be able to operate the suspension from the HMI control box, the suspension must first be locked via the carrier cab, which will allow us to enter into the suspension screens. The F4 button will be active. This will allow us to enter into active suspension, and then we will use the F2 and F3 buttons to access the different options. Currently the F4 button is not active, meaning we cannot operate the suspension. We also do not have the ability to lock and unlock the suspension from the HMI box. Next, we will go to the carrier cab display and we will lock the suspension so we can access the F4 button for active suspension. So once we have entered the cab, we need to lock the suspension so we can operate the suspension from the HMI control boxes. We'll select the menu icon, navigate to the suspension icon, and as in the earlier video, we will navigate down to the suspension lock and unlock icon. We will select OK, and now the suspension is locked. This will now allow us to operate the suspension from the HMI control boxes on the carrier. Now that we have the suspension locked from the carrier display and the ignition is turned on, we see that the F4 button is illuminated, which means that the suspension can be activated and operated from the HMI box. First, we will need to start the crane using the start button. And now we can select the F4 button, which enters into the suspension screen. We have the ability to select different suspension groups similar to what we did in the cab. We use the F2 and F3 buttons to navigate to the different suspension groups. That is selecting all the suspension groups. This is the left side only, right side, front, rear, front left, rear left, right front, and right rear. Also, we can see the pressure indicators for the suspension groups on this display. Once we select a suspension group we want to operate, we now just use the raise and lower buttons to operate the suspension. If we are raising the suspension, we'll select the bottom button, which is actually pushing the struts out or extending, which is going to raise the crane. We also hear an audible alarm to notify us that we are lowering the wheels or pushing the wheels down. To lower the suspension, we will retract the cylinders using the up button to lower the crane. Again, we get the audio alarm to tell us that we are activating the suspension. Once we get the suspension to the height we want, we can exit out of this menu by selecting the F4 button, and now we are back to the outrigger control features on the HMI display. Operating the suspension from the HMI control boxes does not allow you to put the crane at auto level for highway travel. We go back into the menu we did not see an option to auto level the crane here. This can only be done from the carrier cab. However, to operate the suspension from the carrier cab, the suspension must be in an unlocked condition. Currently, right now, since we operate the suspension from the HMI box, we do not have the ability to unlock the suspension from the carrier cab until we are able to put the suspension in a condition that the carrier will allow us to unlock the suspension. This can be done by applying pressure to the suspension struts so they will read evenly in their pressures, and the little symbol in the front that looks like a rectangle represents the cab of the carrier. When that icon is flashing, we will then be able to unlock the suspension from the carrier cab. So we will select all suspension, and we will put some pressure on the suspension groups until the icon for the cab begins to flash. The icon is now flashing. This will now allow us to unlock the suspension from the carrier cab, and then we can put the crane back to highway height for travel. After putting pressure on the carrier suspension struts, so the icon on the HMI operating display was blinking, we can now enter back into the menu via the carrier cab display, enter into the suspension screen, and now we can select to unlock the suspension, which will allow us to put the highway height back to travel condition. We will select the unlock button. Be warned, it will not unlock right away. The crane will try to equalize the pressure even more in the suspension groups. This may take 15, 20, 30 seconds until it actually unlocks the suspension. Select OK. The engine throttle comes up. Audible alarm sounds to indicate that we are unlocking the suspension. We see the pressures changing in the suspension groups. And now the suspension has unlocked. The crane will rock when this happens because there is pressure on all the 4 suspension groups, and when it unlocks, it will rock the crane a little bit. This is normal. Now we have the ability, we could go over to our auto height and put the crane back to auto height for road travel. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Manitowoc Garage. Be sure to tune back in the future for more videos. Thank you.